What's poppin', people? It's Dante. Today we're going to be discussing how to take self-portraits in street photography. Now you may be thinking, why would you take self-portraits on the streets? Why not make photos of strangers? Isn't that the ethos of street photography, right? However, when it comes to practicing street photography, I think we don't know what it really feels like to be on the other side of the camera. Most of the time we're photographing strangers. However, through photographing yourself and putting yourself on the other side of the lens, you can have a better understanding and have more empathy towards the subjects that you photograph on the street. And so why I believe street photographers should turn the camera on themselves is to understand that relationship, that dynamic between you and the camera and what it means to be photographed. As we're photographing others, it only makes sense to photograph yourself. And so I find that through photographing myself, I fuel my everyday life with joy, and this is a very foundational way in which I approach photography. However, it's also allowing me to explore creative angles where I can explore vertical frames. If I find myself in a situation where there's no subjects in sight, I can place myself in that light and make a photograph, and I look back at it and it fuels me with delight, where this photograph I made outside of City Hall is intriguing because of the way in which the building is framed within the composition and the light is casted upon my face and revealing half of my eye. And I find that there are different ways that I can play and experiment and tinker with the self-portrait. By photographing myself, I'm experimenting more. I'm playing with lighting. I'm playing with different situations where I can essentially plug myself into a composition. I'm taking the train. I'm visiting a family member. I'm looking out the window and I'm documenting my everyday life. And essentially my philosophy around photography is to treat photography like a visual diary for my day. And essentially I just bring my camera along for the ride, and I take photos of myself sometimes, and I think that I enjoy becoming a part of the art. I enjoy becoming a part of my photography process, where turning the camera on myself is plugging me into the narrative. It's plugging me into my catalog of photographs, my archive, and I think it's an interesting approach because we oftentimes are simply photographing strangers, and this is a very fundamental aspect of street photography, right? However, through positioning your body in a frame, through positioning yourself in a way that almost appears like a candid shot, I find that it almost fits within my other street shots in a way. And it's kind of fun because essentially embracing the selfie as a part of my street photography journey is fueling my lust for life itself. This is to me why I practice street photography. It simply brings me joy. It's a way for me to plug myself into my own work. I'm playing more with the light. I'm playing with gestures, with perspectives. I'm standing by windows and finding that the light and the way that it casts upon me and my hands or my gestures can become intriguing. I like playing with the light. I like playing with these different ways in which I can make a photograph. And so if there are no subjects in sight, it's very simple. I can just plug myself into the composition. And so by exploring with the light and exploring with the different ways I can frame a composition using myself as the subject, I give myself more creative ideas for the future for when I go out there and practice street photography. And so when I make photographs in this way, very practically, I'm shooting with the Ricoh GR III. It's a compact digital camera. It's extremely simple. I have the program mode set into the camera with single point autofocus, and I basically just flip the camera upside down like you see in this video behind the scenes, point and shoot. I usually use natural light. I simply use window light a lot of the times, that natural light that hits my face. I look up towards the sun, I press the shutter and move on. And so to make a self-portrait with the Ricoh, it's actually so easy. I actually can't imagine making self-portraits with any other camera that's not compact because of the way that you can orient the camera and maneuver the camera and flip it upside down and simply hold it out in front of you like a human tripod. So there is something very specific about using a Ricoh this way that allows you to play with the self-portrait more. And so if you shoot with a Ricoh, I encourage you to give this a try because it's very unique to our camera setup, is the ability for us to make these self-portraits. And it's something that I naturally sort of intuitively began doing as I maneuver the camera and realized how I can extend it in front of me and make a self-portrait. And so here's the result of the photo from that behind-the-scenes video, using the natural light, using the window as my lighting source, and using that reflection where you can see my face casted upon the window there. And so also one of the things that I love about making self-portraits is it's been boosting my confidence, right? It's making myself art, where your face, your body, your self is art, right? We were all created and we all have our own unique facial features. We all have our own unique bodies that we embody each and every day. And there's something about that sort of idea of treating yourself as art that, honestly, I think that we're supposed to treat our lives like living works of art. And so I believe that making a self-portrait not only makes our bodies, makes our faces, makes ourself into the art itself through the act of making a photograph, but I also believe that the simple act of making a photograph, it's going to boost your joy. It's going to boost your confidence. It's going to boost your courage to go out there and to make more pictures of strangers. I think the more I've been turning the camera on myself, the more confident I'm becoming and the more courageous I'm becoming to go out there and to engage with other people. And so the other day I was trying on a suit, or what is this, a tuxedo, and I never wear anything like fancy, or I never wear these kind of clothing. But I remember looking in the mirror and I was making a self-portrait and I was like, I look good. I was like, this is kind of interesting. Like, I actually would never wear this otherwise. But let me make a portrait of myself wearing this because I thought I looked kind of nice. And it just boosts your confidence. It's very interesting, actually. And so the freedom to create. When I'm making self-portraits, I can make them anywhere I am. Here I'm in Rome, waiting in my bed, just waking up in the morning. And, I was just relaxing and I gestured to sort of make this composition more interesting. And, I'm just using it as a way for me to creatively express myself wherever I may be. And I find that I can make anything anywhere these days using self-portrait as one of those tools in my tool belt to just utilize when I don't feel inspired, right? If I'm not feeling too inspired to photograph, I can always turn the camera on myself, make a self-portrait, and then get back into that flow state of making pictures, essentially. And, it's a very simple and accessible way for anybody to make a picture. Actually, it's so easy to get into, is simply using yourself as the subject. There's something about this process of photographing yourself that will ultimately give you more possibilities to create. And I believe that making selfies as a part of the process will help you tap into that flow state of making more pictures. When I photograph myself these days, I'm being more creative. I'm playing more with my camera. For instance, here during the sunrise, I was playing with the lighting and the angle at which I made the photograph. I actually was using the Ricoh GR III and I used the crop mode built into the camera to go to 71 millimeters, face towards the camera, made the self-portrait from my side profile, and was experimenting with the light and the way that it casted upon my face. And some of these situations I can make lots of photographs in, experimenting with vertical or horizontal composition, experimenting with side profile, with looking at the camera, or looking towards the light, or looking away from the camera. There's so many different ways that you can play with your gestures, play with the lighting, the expressions. And so I encourage you, when you're out there and you're making self-portraits, to experiment and to tinker with the light, and to, always find yourself creatively inspired through this act of making a picture of yourself. Because ultimately, life isn't so serious. And I think that when you make self-portraits, you remind yourself of the joy of photography, right? You remind yourself that this thing isn't so serious. You remind yourself that, street photography and practicing photography isn't supposed to be this very rigid, this very dogmatic thing, but there's just so many ways to play the game. And so I find that there's so many different dynamic ways to play with self-portraits. I particularly prefer shooting in the situations during sunrise or sunset when the light outside is striking. This offers more creative flexibility. I like using the light and shadow play in my photography generally, and so these dynamic lighting situations are always fun for me to play with. I love the way in which the light and shadow play casts upon my face, sometimes revealing the eye, sometimes crushing the eye in the shadows, and so I use these different approaches to emphasize the dynamics of light and shadow in my street photography. And so it's very simple how I approach self-portraits. I like these kind of photographs with this sort of high contrast lighting where I'm in the light and the background is completely crushed in black. And so I use a patch of light to my advantage. A lot of the times I look up towards the light to add dramatic effect in the self-portrait. I keep my expression very simple. I don't typically make an expression in the photograph. I typically keep my photographs, just a candid, sort of expression, using the shadows to add drama to the frame. I experiment with the different angles, of course, whether I'm shooting head on, tilted, vertical, horizontal. I play with the camera orientation. But at the end of the day, right, this thing isn't so serious. And I really just wanted to make this video because I want to encourage other people to explore the different ways that you can approach the streets with a camera, as there are so many different possibilities out there to make photographs. I think that ultimately as street photographers, we get bogged down by making a photograph of other people. We get sort of caught up with the notion of what is street photography, what counts, how can I approach street photography? But ultimately, it's really up to you and how you want to play the game. And I think that implementing the self-portrait into your process will just simply bring more joy and liberation to the process of making these candid photos on the streets, essentially. And so recognize that you're always a subject worth photographing. I think self-portraits matter because we are the, sort of artist behind the camera, and I believe that revealing our soul, revealing our face is something that maybe many photographers of the past typically didn't do, right? This is a very modern day phenomenon to make selfies. I think that the act of making a selfie, it's very democratic. It's kind of like I don't know, we're becoming a part of the sort of the contemporary culture of photography, but putting our own twist on it through using dramatic lighting and using our photography chops and our compositional awareness and the way that we understand light to create more dramatic and more interesting selfies than, a typical snapshot with an iPhone, right? And so I believe that self-portraits also reflect who you are. And at the end of the day, our photographs also that we make of other people or things and places are a reflection of our soul. So essentially treat this thing like a visual diary of your day. I think this is the most core and, sort of empowering philosophy that I've adopted in my photography, is just living my everyday life and bringing the camera for the ride. And then ultimately I come home with photographs that intrigue me because I'm simply following my own inner curiosities, and I'm not limiting myself with what I'm photographing, how I'm photographing, why I'm photographing, where I'm photographing. But I'm simply photographing, and I'm simply allowing myself to become a part of that process by making self-portraits. And so I encourage you to make photographs of yourself when you find that there's no subjects out there. Use light to enhance and embrace the process, right? Try out different angles, experiment with gestures. I encourage you to explore self-portraits by placing yourself in your photography as a simple way for you to liberate yourself creatively, fuel yourself with joy, and find more meaning in those mundane moments where you find yourself alone in a patch of light and there's nobody in sight to make a photograph, but you turn the camera on yourself and there you are making 100 pictures from different angles, finding yourself inspired again to go back into that flow state of clicking the shutter more. And so this is my way in which I adopted the self-portrait in my process, and there really is no one way to do this thing. This is simply the way in which I engage with the self-portrait. Of course, the Ricoh makes it 10 times easier due to its compact nature. However, I believe that if you go out there and you simply remain open to this idea that you can make a self-portrait, you'll just find yourself infinitely curious about the number of ways in which you can make a photograph of a stranger or make a portrait of a stranger. It can just give you more ideas to work with when you're out there and you're practicing your candid street photography. So that's how I like to approach this thing. And then another thing that I do practically with my self-portraits is, if I do some writing on my own website blog, or if I'm publishing a blog post, I can implement these self-portraits to give a face to my writing, or give a face to the person who's making the photographs that you see on the screen. Or I just think that there's an unlimited amount of use cases that we can create for ourselves making these self-portraits. And yeah, I think it's a fun way to explore the streets, and it just gives you endless possibilities, really, because you're always there as a worthwhile subject to photograph. So yeah, with that being said, thank you for watching today's video, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.